which could provide tremendous benefits to our men and women in uniform and certainly tremendous savings for the American taxpayers. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just not sure how this amendment accomplishes what the gentleman says, since it prohibits enforcement of a section of a fiscal year 2006 bill which only applied to that fiscal year. So I'm not opposed to the amendment. I just don't believe it does anything. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of this amendment, and one of which I have also co-sponsored with the gentleman. This amendment, quite honestly, is a common sense in that it simply looks to add accountability to how the Pentagon spends our taxpayer dollars. Now, the GAO released an independent audit they performed in March that concluded that the costs of the Pentagon's largest programs have risen by $135 billion, that's over 9%, to $1.68 trillion by 2008. And as was pointed out, over half of that, or $70 billion of that, involves overruns. And what they say in their report, quote, to indicative of production problems and inefficiencies or flawed initial cost and estimates. Since then, we have not had a complete audit by the Pentagon, and since then, overruns have only multiplied. You know, just this past week, earlier in this week, I had the opportunity to serve in Budget Committee, where we had CBO come in. And we asked them point blank for some of the information that we would like to have with regard to these audits. We'd like the information from them so they could pinpoint some of the, as we always say on the floor, the waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on. But more specifically, where the inefficiencies are. And the answer we got from them was somewhat telling. They said they cannot supply this Congress with the information that we would like because they do not get the information themselves from the DoD. And that is the problem. The Department of Defense is consistently over in budget and acquisition and equipment modernization. 92% of major defense acquisition programs, 75% of them are over budget. 20% of them are over budget by more than 50%. Mr. Chairman, this is something that needs to be addressed. This amendment will once again hold the Pentagon accountable, assuring that the taxpayer dollars are spent prudently as intended. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
He has to stand. He has to recognize me. Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Alaska is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like at this time to ask the chairman to participate in a colloquy with me. He's supposed to be good to me. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to express my concern about our strategic ports. First, I want to thank the chairman for discussing this important issue with me. I think the chairman will agree that understanding and addressing vital infrastructure needs on our strategic seaports is of major importance.
The gentleman yield.
Yes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would tell him that I do agree that assessing and correcting infrastructure problems at the nation's strategic seaports, which are an integral part of our national defense readiness, is of vital importance.
Since 1958, the Strategic Seaport Program has facilitated the movement of military forces securely through the U.S. ports. Each strategic seaport has individual capabilities that provide the Department of Defense with port facilities and services that are critical in maintaining and operation of a flexible fleet. Need a wide range of national security missions and timelines. However, the existing infrastructure at many of the strategic ports may no longer be adequate to meet the needs of both their authorization and appropriation process. That is why I worked with Chairman McKeon to include language in the Defense Authorization Bill that would require a study of the infrastructure needs of these strategic ports. Once that study has been conducted, I believe it is of vital importance that this committee provide the necessary funding to address the needs of these ports.
Mr. Chairman, I also believe that these ports to be critical to our defense, and I'll be happy to work with the gentleman from Alaska to consider the appropriate measures and funding to address the infrastructure needs of our strategic seaports.
I want to thank the chairman for discussing this issue with me. I would just like to say to the chairman, I appreciate the fact that we recognize the importance of ports to move our products. I know that the ranking member does also, so I yield back the balance of time. Again, thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Conyers of Michigan. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used for 1, deploying members of the armed forces on the ground of Libya for the purposes of engaging
The clerk will
in
suspend.
Mr. Speaker, may I withdraw that amendment temporarily?
Without objection.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Javier.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to engage in a colloquy with the chairman and ranking member on recruitment and outreach at the military service academies.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some areas in the U.S. have been harder for the military academies to reach for recruitment purposes than others. To ease this problem, the Congress should work to ensure that the military academies have the ability to reach out to men and women from underrepresented rural and urban areas. Past outreach efforts have been effective at the military academies. For example, in the U.S. Naval Academy's increased outreach efforts, we have seen results that show that some 19,145 applicants have come out for the class of 2015. That's an increase of 25% over the past 2 years. The Navy has been able to conduct recruitment blitzes in parts of the country that were traditionally underrepresented. In my home state of California, the Navy increased their applicants by 25%, from some 2,400 for the class of 2013 to over 3,000 for the class of 2015. I believe it's important for the academies to have the resources to continue building upon this success. This critical investment would help America find the best and the brightest for our military and for America's future. I yield to the chairman.
For yielding, and I agree with the gentleman that it is important that the military academies bring in the best young people from across the country, and the committee will work with him toward this objective.
Thank you, Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
Certainly yield to the ranking member.
I agree with the chairman and stand ready to work with the gentleman to reach out, and I commend him for the work that he's been doing over the years. Reach out to all regions of the country to bring the best and brightest into the military academies.
I thank the ranking member and the chairman. I look forward to working with them. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment at the desk designated as number 1.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amount otherwise made available by this act for operation and maintenance defense-wide is hereby reduced by $250 million.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. This amendment would reduce the operation and maintenance defense-wide account by $250 million, the same amount appropriated by Section 8122 of the bill. Section 8122 appropriates another $250 million in FY12 for the Secretary of Defense to use through the Office of Economic Adjustment, or to transfer to the Secretary of Education to make grants to public schools located on military bases for construction, renovation, and repairs. I'll just summarize what's happening here. We have some schools that are on military bases. Now, some of the schools on military bases are run by the Department of Defense. That's not what we're speaking about here. The schools that we're talking about here are LEAs, or local education agencies run them. And in the FY11 budget, we appropriated $250 million of defense money. This is in the defense bill, to go to schools that are the responsibility of local education agencies. Now, some of these schools are in disrepair. They're in bad shape. Nobody's questioning that. Education budgets are tight everywhere around the country. Ask your own states, ask your local school districts. But we cannot continue to divert money from the Department of Defense simply because that's where money is and few people question it. And I'm sure the gentleman will stand up here and say, hey, these schools are in bad shape, they're on military bases, we've got to fix them. And the Department of Defense has said these schools or the local education agencies are saying they're in disrepair. But why are we taking money that should be going to the military, to the troops, to other purposes, and diverting it to local education or local schools that are the responsibility of local education agencies? And I have here one of the contracts for one of these schools that is being discussed here. It says the permittee or his designee shall at his own cost and expense protect, preserve, maintain, repair, and keep in good order condition these schools. This is the local education agency, not the Department of Defense. That shouldn't be the responsibility of the Department of Defense, and we're bleeding off $250 million. Now, I'm sure the gentleman will stand up and say, this is needed, this isn't going to be a continual thing, we just got to bring these schools up to repair. He'll say that the Department of Defense has said that these schools are in disrepair. They are. Nobody is questioning that. The question is, where should this money come from? And if we have this kind of money to throw around for defense, then we ought to be cutting more defense funding. This funding, if there's a problem, it should go through the local defense, or I'm sorry, the local education agencies, or convince the Federal Department of Education through impact aid to send money to these schools, but not the Department of Defense. That has been the practice, unfortunately, around here for quite a while now. We say, all right, what account can we take money from for earmarks or whatever else that few people will question? It's defense spending. And so we take that off for education or research or whatever else, and pretty soon we're diverting a lot of money that should go to the troops to other purposes. Like I said, nobody's questioning that these schools are in bad repair. Newsweek ran an article on June 27th, said 39% of the schools run by the public systems on Army installations fell in the failing or poor category. I don't question that. Nobody does. What's at question here is another $250 million. As I said, we appropriated in the FY11 budget $250 million. So apparently this is going to become a standard practice now. And then you start to get to the prospect of members of Congress starting to submit their local bases and saying, hey, the schools there are bad, and we get into the old earmarking game by letter or phone marking or whatever else, because it won't be, it'll be the spoil system all over again as to who gets the defense money to actually fix these schools. So this would simply say this money, $250 million, that has been requested for this purpose shall not be spent. The gentleman may stand up and say, hey, this is generally taken from the Department of Defense or from the Office of Economic from the Operations and Maintenance, and so that's not specific enough. Believe me, the Secretary of Defense, if they have the choice to fund the troops or the schools, will fund the troops, because the schools are under the responsibility of the local education agency. The Department of Defense may submit a list and say, these schools are in disrepair, but it's not the responsibility of the Department of Defense to fund these schools. And with that, I will, if the gentleman will yield back to me during his time.
Yes.
The gentleman's time's expired.
I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. And the
gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentleman was quite good at making the case against this amendment, but I'll have to reiterate some of the things. First of all, I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The bill provides an additional $250 million to improve or replace inadequate schools located on Department of Defense bases that are operated by local education authorities and the Department of Education. Most of these are run by the local authorities. The Army has identified 80 local education authority-operated schools within the continental United States that are inadequate because of poor condition or a lack of capacity to accommodate the number of students enrolled. Initial funding in the fiscal year 2011 bill will address approximately 13 of these schools. Nearly 42,000 school-age dependents of U.S. service personnel are enrolled in schools on DoD bases that are owned and operated by either LEAs or the U.S. Department of Education. The recommendation is based on former Defense Secretary Robert Gates's remarks to military spouses at a May 8, 2010 town hall meeting at Fort Riley, Kansas. The Secretary then called me as chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee last year and said, Norm, we've got to do something about these schools. And we have these young men and women serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the last thing we need to do is have them worried about their children, because some of these schools, if there was a hurricane, if there was a earthquake, if there was a lahar from Mount Rainier, these schools could go down. I walked out there and seen these schools at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and one of the conditions, if you're going to get money here, is that you must take over the school. Local school districts are going to have to take them over from this point forward. So we'll get out of the responsibility, but we have to bring these schools up to code and standards and rebuild most of them. And this is not done, and this list was developed by the Army, and then the Navy and the Air Force and Marine Corps also were involved. The former Secretary indicated that his plan to improve schools requires congressional approval. Caring for the dependents of U.S. service personnel is a vital contributor to military quality of life and represents a prudent investment in our nation's future. I urge my colleagues to reject the amendment. And let me also say, in the military construction bill, there was $463 million for schools that are owned by the Department of Defense. Many of these schools are overseas in other countries, and yet we're putting $463 million into those schools. At the same time, the gentleman from Arizona wants to deny the young people of our country schools that they could go into. And there's one in Arizona. The gentleman's running for the other body. I think he'd be concerned about the school in Arizona that may not get funded if his amendment passes. And I hope the people of Arizona remember it, because the people of Washington State will certainly remember it. This is a bad amendment, and we should defeat it.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will not yield. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word and to associate myself
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to oppose the amendment and associate my remarks with those of the ranking member. We're talking about the dependence of U.S. military. And when you visit military bases, some of these schools are deplorable. When we make a commitment to a young person in the military and they're married and they have children, they ought to be able to go to schools on their military base that are of high standards. And I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman if he wishes.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I should mention that the gentleman from Washington mentioned that the Secretary of Defense said we've got to do something about these schools. I should note that this was not in the defense request. If he thought that something ought to be done, you'd think that they would have put it in their request. They didn't. It wasn't in the authorization bill. There is a Department of Education program, a competitive program for this already. If we think that it should have more money, then it should.
Reclaiming my time, I yield to the gentleman from Washington.
They don't have any money. The Department of Education can't fund this because the new majority is taking almost a lot of the money out of the Department of Education that they'd use for this purpose. And they don't have the money. That's why the Secretary called us and said, and this is Fort Riley, Kansas, one of your side, a school in the district of a Republican member. And he said, we've got to do something. And we didn't say we'll do this on a partisan basis. We said, hey, these men and women in these Stryker brigades are over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the last thing we need to do is have them be worried about their children in these schools that could go down if we had an earthquake. And we've had all these natural disasters all over this country. And I just say to the gentleman, this is the most ridiculous amendment I've heard of yet. And he's had some Lulus. And I just hope we can defeat this amendment, and so the people of this country will know we care about our kids serving in the military and their families. I yield back.
I reclaim my time and yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On that, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Designated as number 2.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona at the end of the bill. Before the short title, insert the following new section. Section, the amount otherwise provided by Title IX of Overseas Contingency Operations Transfer Fund is hereby reduced by $3,577,192,676.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. This amendment is straightforward. It would simply reduce the amount appropriated to the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund, Transfer Fund, by roughly $3.5 billion. We often hear in this body that the Constitution grants the Congress the power of the purse, that the President's budget is not sacrosanct, and that members should be able to guide federal spending. I agree with that. So I was quite surprised that the committee included in this bill an appropriation of $5 million to the Overseas Contingency Operation Transfer Fund, but provided virtually no guidance on how it should be spent, beyond requiring that any obligations be, quote, pursuant to the global war on terrorism. That's roughly 4% of the overall cost of the war spending portion of this bill. I understand that the funding could provide the Department of Defense with a little more flexibility as it moves ahead with operations in Afghanistan, and while simultaneously withdrawing troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm sympathetic to the need to properly fund the war in a way that requires us to budget for it. But this $5 million has very few strings attached that could also be used for just about anything, including as a bargaining chip for negotiations with the Senate. According to the CQ today, which ran on June 14th, I would submit that it's an expensive bargaining chip, and it's a very risky gamble, in my view. The President recently announced his intent to withdraw 10,000 U.S. troops from Afghanistan, which I think he'll make the case for in the months ahead, and the Department of Defense has some flexibility as we move ahead in the months ahead. So I think it's fair to reduce the amount appropriated in this fund to roughly $1.5 billion. That amounts to 1% of the war-related costs of the bill instead of 4%. Overseas Contingency Operation Transfer Funds have been requested in the past by the Department of Defense. I understand that. I think we all understand that, to give the Department of Defense some flexibility. What I'm saying here is $5 billion is a little too much flexibility here. Let's regain our prerogative here to direct this money, to have the power of the purse, and simply not allow that amount, $5 billion. That would simply reduce it to $1.5 billion. According to CQ today, the Army requested about $2 billion for transportation expenses in Afghanistan. The House panel said that the funding need was overstated because the Army was assuming all supplies are flown in to that country with only about 20% arrive by air. I commend the committee for carefully drilling down on the requests submitted by the services and identifying places where funding is unjustified and unneeded. However, instead of pulling back all the money in what could become a slush fund, we should do better. We should take steps to simply make sure that money that doesn't have to be spent is not spent. That's what this amendment does. I yield back the balance of my time and urge its adoption.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentleman from Arizona's amendment, which would cut $3.6 billion from the Overseas Contingency Operations budget. The committee believes that the Army's fiscal year 2012 operation and maintenance request for overseas contingency operations may be overstated due to unrealistic planning assumptions. However, due to the great deal of uncertainty of the justification for the Army's O&M budget request, the committee added an appropriations account, the Overseas Contingency Operation Transfer Fund account, and shifted $5 billion of funding from the Army into this account. This account gives the Secretary of Defense flexibility to reprogram these funds for unforeseen requirements which emerged during 2012. For example, if redeployment from Afghanistan were to be accelerated, and some would suggest it should be, there would be a very significant increase in personnel and equipment transportation costs in fiscal year 2012. Examples of requirements which emerged during the year of budget execution in prior years include funding for the MRAP vehicles, the mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles, additional body armor that was needed, and other force protection things, what we call joint urgent operational needs. And, of course, there are always spikes in fuel costs. So for these and many other reasons, Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the amendment and urge others to do so as well.
The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On that, I would ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Michigan
Mr.
rise?
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and ask that it be called up.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Conyers of Michigan. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used for 1, deploying members of the armed forces to the ground of Libya for the purposes of engaging in military operations unless
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise with the assistance of my good friends Tom McClintock of California and Lynn Woolsey of California and Barbara Lee of California. And it's my Libyan amendment again, which would prevent funds appropriated in this act from being used to deploy any type of ground troop presence for the purpose of pursuing military operations on Libyan territory. This amendment would simply codify the policy endorsed by President Obama and the international community, and thereby ensure that our involvement in Libya remains limited in scope. An identical amendment passed this House on May 26 by a vote of 416 to 5 as part of the National Defense Act. It's also the intent of this amendment, as it was in my earlier amendment, that funds would be allowed to be used to rescue members of the armed forces participating in the NATO no-fly zone operation. The American people, obviously many of them have grown weary of the open-ended military conflicts that place our troops in harm's way and adds billions to our national debt. We simply cannot afford another Afghanistan or Iraq. And so the time has come for Congress to once again exercise its constitutional authority to place boundaries on the use of our military forces overseas and clearly state that this conflict in Libya will not escalate into an expensive occupation that would strain our resources and harm our national security interests. Of course, with pleasure.
For your amendment, we'd be willing to accept it.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time is expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman. Oh. Does the gentleman from California seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in strong support of the amendment authored by my good friend from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, which I am very proud to be a co-sponsor. The war in Libya, which was not authored by this body or our Senate colleagues, has lingered for more than 100 days. Mr. Chairman, despite the legal contortions coming from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, the dropping of bombs, the killing of civilians, and the use of drones in Libya most definitely constitutes hostilities. And it's our responsibility in the Congress to make sure that these hostilities do not escalate into a full-blown ground war with boots on the ground and the United States becoming an occupying force in Libya. The President has assured us that this won't happen, and I believe that a ground war is not his intention. But it wouldn't be the first time, Mr. Chairman, in the history of the United States warfare that there was a shift in strategy, with the military campaign beginning as one thing and ending up as quite another. So it's critical that we assert ourselves using the congressional authority to appropriate funds to say no to launching a third ground war. Our authority rests on how we use the people's money. Today's amendment denies the use of our tax dollars to send troops into Libya. With that, I would like to include the rest of my remarks into the record and to thank the majority for accepting this amendment. Thank you.
Without objection. Gentlelady's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to ask Subcommittee Chairman Young if you'd enter in a colloquy regarding the Department of Defense's future plans for data storage.
I would be pleased to enter into a colloquy on behalf of Chairman Young with you, sir.
Thank you. As Chairman is aware, as you are aware, the Department of Defense has many cybersecurity goals and challenges. With the daily reports on cyber attacks and intrusions, I feel that Congress needs to express its concerns before there's a cyber event that will impact and damage national security. The Department of Defense is the world's largest target for cyber attacks. There are many aspects of cyber defense infrastructure, but I'd like to focus on one critical piece, the physical location of classified data. I'm very concerned that the Department of Defense will not weigh the physical storage of classified data sufficiently in their efforts to save money through the consolidation and modernization of the innovation technology infrastructure. In addition, I worry that unnecessarily storing classified data abroad could increase the risk that this information could be stolen, damaging national security and potentially harming our troops. I would ask the Chairman if he would be willing to work with me to ensure the Department of Defense's future plans for data storage address these concerns to maintain the highest standards of protection for classified data. Keeping critical defense data under positive control and physically securing that data is just common sense for national security. Building and operating data centers here will create American jobs as well as make it easier to control access and make it harder for foreign operatives to steal things such as nuclear secrets, weapon systems designs, and battle plans. And with that, I will yield.
Chairman Young and the committee thank the gentleman from Illinois for bringing this matter to our attention. We share his concern for the protection of all classified data. We believe the threat from cyber attacks is real and is growing. We commend the gentleman for his leadership in this area, and we will be happy to work with you and the ranking member to ensure that our troops and nation maintain control of all classified data.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield to Ranking Member Dix.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois brings up a very important issue, and I too look forward to working with the gentleman to ensure that classified data is protected from misuse and theft. Cybersecurity may be the most important defense issue that we face in the coming years. The Department of Defense itself is hit 250,000 times per hour, which is unbelievable, but it's true. And so we need to work on this, and I'm glad the gentleman has taken an interest in this important subject.
If the gentleman yield back.
I do yield back.
I want to thank Chairman Young and Ranking Member Dix for their commitment to troops and national security, and I know Mr. Dix is especially concerned about cybersecurity. So with that, I will yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I have an amendment the desk designated as number 3.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by Title IV of this Act are revised by reducing the amount made available for research, development, test, and evaluation, Army, by reducing the amount made available for research, development, test, and evaluation, Navy, by reducing the amount made available for research, development, test, and evaluation, Air Force, by reducing the amount made available for research, development, test, and evaluation defense-wide, and by reducing the amount made available for operational test and evaluation defense by $93,811,660, $177,989,500, $263,131,000.
Amendment be considered read.
Is there objection? Without objection, the gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment would reduce each of the research, development, test, and evaluation accounts by 1%, or roughly $730 million below the currently appropriated $73 billion provided for in this measure. Amendments of this sort have been offered to other defense-related measures recently, though they have attempted to cut amounts far greater than I am proposing. During one of these debates, the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee made the point, quote, "If we're going to reduce the defense budget, there ought to be a good reason." I agree. And I would submit that both the severity of the fiscal situation that we face and the consequences of inaction are compelling reasons to reduce the defense budget along with everything else. The Appropriations Committee started a positive trend during the consideration of the appropriations for fiscal year 2011 when it reduced the RDT&E accounts below the levels that have been funded in recent years. I applaud the committee for taking a serious look at these and other accounts and for acting accordingly. But I think we need to do better. We're going to have to get used to cutting defense budgets here if we're going to get our fiscal situation in order. The defense budget accounts for roughly half of the discretionary spending that is considered during the regular appropriations process during the year. According to the Domenici-Rivlin Commission, Restoring America's Future, RDT&E budgets have increased from $49.2 billion in FY 2001 to $80.2 billion in FY 2010. So you're seeing amount of about 80% higher now than they were just in 2001. That's I'm sure it's a 63% increase. Get my math wrong here. That report also suggests that reducing the RDT&E budget would, quote, impose greater discipline in research investments. In addition, Gordon Adams of the Stimson Center argues in an essay in Foreign Affairs magazine that the RDT&E budget should be reduced, saying that it would, quote, it would be safe to cut it, too, by 19% between 2012 and FY 2018. Such a reduction would yield $87 billion in savings while keeping the United States level of military R&D far and above that of any other country. I'm not attempting or suggesting that we make cuts that deep to these accounts with that amendment. I recognize that they've already taken a sizable hit in FY11. I also know that my colleagues will come to the floor and tout the values of these accounts. They'll talk about and highlight important successes we've achieved with weapons and other systems that wouldn't have been possible without these accounts. I recognize that. But if we're all going to have to get used to voting for cuts in defense, cutting 1% of the $73 billion made available in RDT&E is far from draconian and will not preclude any future successes. I urge adoption of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The allocation for the defense bill has already been reduced by $9 billion. Funding for research and development title of the bill has been reduced from the 2011 level by nearly $2 billion. Further reductions risk harming critical technology development needed to keep current weapons relevant and needed to develop next-generation weapons and technologies required to maintain the U.S. edge in military technologies. The reduction would adversely affect many systems now in development, including the Joint Strike Fighter, where we certainly do not want to fall behind, advanced submarine development, the long-range strike program, missile defense program, further development of precision weapon systems, and many others. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment. Yes, I yield, of course.
The gentleman mentioned that this defense budget is cut $7 billion below?
$9 billion below the President's request.
That's below the President's request,
right.
Not below the budget for next year.
Last year we were 17. We were $17 billion below last year, $9 billion this year. So we're making some serious cuts in this budget.
Well, I just appreciate that this is not the most ridiculous amendment. I'm glad that threshold was reached. In
well,
the last
no, this one won't make the top 10, but we're we're working the list up, so I'll share it with the gentleman down in the gym. So, I yield back my time.
Thanks. The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I want to.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands rise?
I rise to strike the requisite number of words, Chairman.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'd invite the ranking member to enter with me into a colloquy on an important health issue for our military. Taking more lives each year than breast, prostate, colon, and pancreatic cancers combined, today's lung cancer death toll is beyond unacceptable. It is the leading cause of cancer death among men and women across every racial and ethnic group, has a very low 5-year survival rate of only 15%, and this situation can be attributed to both resource limitations in programs dedicated to lung cancer research and the absence of a coordinated and comprehensive plan to reduce lung cancer mortality in this nation by focusing on the entire lung cancer screening, diagnosis, treatment, and care continuum. Today, 80% of new lung cancer cases affect people who neither have smoked or those who have quit smoking, many of them decades ago. It's true of smokers and non-smokers and those populations such as racial and ethnic minorities, women, and low-income Americans who are disproportionately affected by lung cancer. But it is especially the case for our brave men and women who defend this nation and put themselves in harm's way to protect our freedoms. Veterans whose service has put them at higher risk for lung cancer have lung cancer needs that have been and remain unmet. They also suffer from a higher incidence of lung cancer mortality than non-veterans. But additionally, the rate of lung cancer is nearly twice as high among those in the military compared to the larger U.S. population. As a physician, I know that success against lung cancer requires that we approach lung cancer comprehensively, just as we do other major illnesses. Prevention and wellness coupled with early detection, treatment options, and research must be adequately funded and coordinated, just as we do for heart disease, breast cancer, HIV and AIDS, and others. That's why I introduced H.R. 1394, the Lung Cancer Mortality Reduction Act of 2011. We must coordinate activities that will combat lung cancer in vulnerable populations, including our active military, and ensure that for them, as well as for others, that early detection, treatment, and research is adequately supported with benchmarks to gauge progress. We owe it to our nation's heroes to coordinate early screening, treatment, and care, and reduce lung cancer mortality among members of the armed forces and our veterans whose exposure to carcinogens during active duty service is a known contributor to their increased lung cancer risk. I would seek the help of the ranking member to pursue this work in the Defense Health Program within the Department of Defense.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I
will work with the gentlelady on DoD lung cancer research, which we have $10.2 million in the budget this year, and money for other forms of cancer, and treatment efforts in light of the serious problems facing military members. And this is a very serious problem, and I'm glad that you've called it to our attention, and I look forward to working with you on this important issue.
Thank you. With that, I would yield back balance of my time.
The
Thank you.
gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to research, develop, manufacture, or produce or procure a newly designed flight suit or integrated air crew ensemble.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is no bigger supporter, I don't think, in this body of the Air Force than me. I'm an Air National Guard pilot. I've been an Air National Guard pilot for a while now and continue to be even in my service in Congress. But part of what we have to do in this body is find areas of essential versus non-essential spending. And one of those areas I believe is non-essential is $100 million that will be spent if this amendment is not adopted, to develop a new flight suit, in essence. And I think at a time when we're looking at supporting defense as best we can and finding out areas where we can prioritize and make that essential, I think it's important to stop the design of this flight suit and allow that money to be spent in other areas. We've met with the folks that are developing this, that are looking at the idea of this new flight suit, and I'm still convinced that the right thing to do at this time is to halt the development and manufacture of this. So I would just stand and urge the adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Move to strike the last word, Madam Chair.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, the committee would like to thank the gentleman from Illinois for his service in the Air National Guard and obviously his service in Congress. The gentleman from Illinois has made a compelling argument, and we're prepared to accept his amendment. However, we want to be clear that we will continue to study the issue as we support the continued advancement of the safety of all of our pilots. So we just want to make that understood. It needs more study. We're in support of your amendment.
I thank the gentleman.
Okay, thank you. Yield back.
The question is on the amendment. Sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I just wanted to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment would prohibit DOD from developing or manufacturing a newly designed flight suit for members of the armed forces. In November 2010, the Air Force awarded a $99.4 million contract over 7 years to research, develop, and manufacture the flight suit. The November award ended a nearly 3-year competitive bidding process. The Air Force requires that the new flight suit must protect airmen from flames, all kinds of weather, chemical attacks, or radiation, and high gravity that can cause air members to black out. So I urge the rejection of the amendment and yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Lee of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following
I ask for unanimous
section.
consent to consider the amendment as read.
Is there objection?
Object.
Objections heard. The clerk will read.
Section. It is the policy of the United States to withdraw all United States Armed Forces and military contractors from Iraq by December 31st, 2011, and no provision of any agreement between the United States and Iraq that amends
Madam Chair, I ask for unanimous consent to consider the amendment as read.
Is there objection?
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order on the gentlewoman's amendment.
The point of order is reserved. Without objection, the reading is suspended. The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased that my colleagues and friends Congressman Nadler and Woolsey are joining me in offering an amendment that make it the policy of the United States to withdraw all members of the United States Armed Forces and military contractors from Iraq by the end of this year. More importantly, this amendment also clarifies that this timeline cannot be changed unless it is in the form of a treaty requiring the advice and consent of the Senate or unless authorized by an act of Congress. We must ensure that 45,000 United States troops who remain in Iraq and our military contractors leave Iraq at the end of this year, as is stated in our nation's Status of Forces Agreement with Iraq. This is of concern because this week the President and some of his advisors are considering just how many troops they can leave behind. Senators and others are publicizing their opinions. Senator McCain of Arizona has suggested 10,000 to 13,000 troops remain to serve for support in intelligence arenas, as air support, and as a peacekeeping force. Others may eventually call for even more to remain. At the same time, the government of Iraq is feeling pressured on multiple sides to either ask us to stay or to ensure our departure. As one of the original founders of the Out of Iraq Caucus, along with Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, our position has been clear all along. We oppose the war and the occupation from the start, and we have worked day in and day out to end it. We believe that ending the occupation of Iraq means withdrawing all troops, and we mean all troops and all military contractors out of Iraq. It would be unacceptable to have troops remaining in Iraq after December 31st, 2011, unless, of course, there was a treaty or an act of Congress. Leaving troops would hurt U.S. national security interests by adding credence to insurgents' narrative about the U.S. being a permanent occupying force. America's interests in Iraq and the region will be best served by eliminating our military presence and making greater use of our nation's assets, including diplomacy, reconciliation, commerce, development assistance, and humanitarian aid. And we've already set in policy that there shall be no permanent military bases in Iraq. Iraqis must be responsible for the security of Iraq, which they have demonstrated more and more as we have been pulling out of their country. The American people have no interest in extending our presence in Iraq, and they are looking to Congress to ensure that we bring our troops home and focus the savings on the challenges facing our nation today. Furthermore, we need to ensure that if any security commitment is required, that such commitment be established by a treaty or an act of Congress. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman
Madam
from
Chairman,
New
I
Jersey
make a
rise?
point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change the existing law and constitute legislation on an appropriation bill, and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriation bill shall not be in order if changing existing law. The amendment gives affirmative direction in effect. I am asking for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? The Chair will rule. The amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California proposes to express a legislative sentiment of the House. As such, the amendment constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. The point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Lee of California. At the end of the bill, before the spending reduction amount, insert the following section: prohibition on use of funds. None of the funds made available by this act may be used for any account of the Department
Madam
of
Chair, I
Defense.
ask for unanimous consent that the bill be read, that the amendment, excuse me, be suspended as read.
Is there objection?
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order on the gentlewoman's amendment.
The point of order is reserved. Without objection, the reading is suspended. The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join my esteemed colleague, Ms. Jan Schakowsky from Illinois, in offering an amendment that hits at the heart of the issue of fiscal responsibility. This amendment would freeze the Department of Defense's programs at the fiscal year 2011 levels unless the financial statements of the Department of Defense for FY 2011 are ready to be audited in 6 months from the date of enactment. However, this amendment would exempt military personnel, reserve personnel, and National Guard. These personnel accounts would be actually exempt. Also, the Defense Health Program account from this potential funding freeze. It also contains a waiver for any potential harm to national security or combat forces. In these financial times, they're very difficult financial times, we all know. More and more people are learning the importance of keeping to a budget and being able to track where every single penny of their paycheck goes, if they have a paycheck. For too many Americans right now, survival boils down to appropriately spending and saving every dollar and every cent that they have and budgeting what little money they have left. Sadly, the Department of Defense Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have documented that the Defense Department cannot tell the American taxpayers how their money is being spent. That really is quite shocking. We cannot wait any longer for the books to be we cannot wait any longer for the books to be audited. This requirement first came down in 1990, and over the years, this requirement that they keep the books that can be checked over has been pushed back to 2017. Already, the Department of Defense has stated that they need an extension. How many times do we turn our backs on an agency spending money without being able to account for it? How many more stories of expensive ashtrays and overpriced hammers do we need to have before we begin to deal with this in an effective way? The bloated Pentagon budget, filled with waste, fraud, and abuse, must be able to be audited. The American people expect to know where our defense dollars are going. They pay for this Defense Department, and they expect Congress to be the watchdog of these agencies. In fact, I believe that it's critical that the Department of Defense not only be ready for an audit, but actually pass an audit. Today, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, be fiscally responsible, and hold the Pentagon books accountable to get its financial books in order. We require that of the business sector, of the private sector. We require that of our own family budgets. Why in the world don't we require that of the Pentagon, where so much of our hard-earned tax dollars are being spent? And so we should freeze their spending, freeze their budget until we know what they're doing with their money. An audit is a very reasonable request, and I hope that the other side understands that this really is in the spirit of fiscal responsibility and helping to ensure that the Pentagon's books are in order.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose is the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Chair, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation on an appropriation bill and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriation bill should not be in order if changing existing law. The amendment gives affirmative direction in effect. I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any member wish to speak on the point of order? The Chair is prepared to rule. The Chair finds that this amendment includes language conferring authority. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. The point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. What purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise? Yeah. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 77, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Huelskamp of Kansas.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise this evening to ensure that America's military bases are not used to advance a narrow social agenda. Earlier this year, the Navy Chief of Chaplains announced that military chaplains who desire to perform same-sex marriages would be allowed to do so following the repeal of the policy known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The directive said that chaplains could perform same-sex ceremonies in states where such marriages and unions are legal. Apparently, the Navy has recently backed away from such instruction, but tepidly and weakly, and in a way that leaves the door open to reinstatement of this policy. This amendment I offer will prohibit the enforcement of the directive allowing chaplains to perform same-sex marriages on Navy bases, regardless of whatever a state's law is on gay marriage. In thinking about what has made our military successful, two things come to my mind: conformity and uniformity. Men and women who join our military are to conform to the military standards, not the other way around. And regardless of where a ship is docked or a plane parked, our service members know what to anticipate and how to behave. Rules and expectations are the same everywhere. But with a policy that is flexible and changes based on the state, the military doesn't embrace its one-size-fits-all mentality that has made it so accomplished, disciplined, and orderly. As the Navy and other military branches prepare for the repeal of this 1993 law, hours upon hours of sensitivity training have been presented to men and women in uniform. Such instruction has included warning that failure to embrace alternative lifestyles could result in penalties for service members. What will happen to chaplains who decline to officiate over same-sex ceremonies? The directive states that chaplains may perform same-sex civil marriage ceremonies. I fear that chaplains who refuse to perform these ceremonies may find themselves under attack and their careers threatened. Madam Speaker, we must ensure the religious liberty of all military members, particularly that of chaplains. And in my family, I've had a military chaplain who served approximately more than 4 decades, and so this is particularly important to me personally. But regardless of how someone feels about the repeal of the policy known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I think we can all agree that instructing military chaplains that they can perform same-sex marriages goes above and beyond the instruction to repeal that particular law. In fact, this directive is not only an overreach of the repeal, but also a direct assault on the Defense of Marriage Act. It should be noted these two laws passed with bipartisan support and were signed into law by Democrat President Bill Clinton. Repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell was supposed to be about allowing people in the military to serve openly, not about promoting same-sex marriages in contravention of the Defense of Marriage Act. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment in order to promote and ensure conformity and uniformity to the military culture, not the other way around, to promote religious liberty of military chaplains, and to promote consistency with federal laws on marriage. And I yield back the balance of my time.